Hello, everyone, and welcome to View from the Top. My name is Dario Betti. I'm the CEO of the Mobile Ecosystem Forum. View from the Top is our chance to go a bit deeper and talk to some of the people that are managing some of the companies out there in the mobile ecosystem, changing the perspective of the ecosystem itself. We speak a lot about what they do sometimes, not as much about who they are, what they're thinking of. So we'd like to introduce you today to a chance to speak in a different settings with Ken Murphy, the Vice President and General Manager of Critical Events Management at Blackberry ad hoc. Ken, welcome, or I should say welcome again. Because
Thanks, Dario.
We've seen you many times in different positions in the history of MEF. We've seen you and you've seen us multiple times. Whereabouts are you today, Ken, by the way?
I'm talking to you today from Dallas-Fort Worth area, where we have unseasonably warm weather, and I'm looking forward to the discussion today, and Happy New Year to you.
Well, Happy New Year to you too, and by the way, this is our chance to also check how different the weather in US can be at any time. So only a few weeks, how different would it be? But it's great to have you here, and I do ask where you are because in your history you have been across the continent, so to speak. So, but now sadly in Texas, so nice and warm over there. And I would like to spend the next 10-20 minutes as we're going to have kind of going back through the perspective you built over the years, but also what you think of today. And parting, well, let's start with that straight away. Let's start with your career. Let's start how you got here. You have been in multiple positions. I should say, mention Nortel Networks, McAfee's, some of the companies you've recently been to. But how would you define this path? How did you end up at Blackberry and at running the critical event management business of Blackberry? What kind of expertise do you have to build on that?
Well, it's really great to talk to you, Dario. And as you mentioned, I have some history with MEF. In fact, I was a member of MEF when I lived in Europe a number of years ago, and I was actually on the European board. And I learned a lot. I worked with some of the founding members of MEF and met many different people. So it's really great to be back in MEF and to be talking to the stakeholders. So back to your original question, how did I get to where I am in Blackberry today? From my origins in Canada. I'm originally from Ottawa, and for those of you that know Blackberry, the global headquarters is in a city called Waterloo, Ontario. And I actually went to university in Waterloo, Ontario. So I've actually, in a way, returned to my roots. But I guess the best way I would say is I took the scenic route rather than the direct route. I started my career at Nortel. I'm an accountant by training, but I got into the business quite early. And at Nortel, I spent a decade at Nortel. If you remember, the Canadian communications company, it was the Canadian technology darling in the 90s when I joined. And I was able to be at the very beginning stages of what we rely on today as the internet. All of the things that are being talked about in the news today, all of the technologies that I'm sure we'll talk about today, would not exist if we did not have a foundation of connectivity, the basic connectivity. And at Nortel, I was able to be involved in the build out of the next generation networks that we're relying on today. I promise you that many of the viewers who are watching this and just how we're communicating right now through Teams, this conversation is traveling across some of that equipment that I was involved in and putting in, even though all those years ago, I promise you the fiber optic networks, the wireless networks, the technology is still there. So I started at Nortel and we built the network. I then shifted to Real Networks, and Real Networks was a pioneer in media streaming. In fact, if you go back to the very beginning days, we think of streaming as just so synonymous today. It's so easy for everybody to stream video and audio, watch YouTube, all of those things. But the first ever audio stream, live audio stream on the internet was actually delivered by Real Networks. it was a baseball game, and you should listen to it sometime. It's hilarious how the commentators are talking about how it was being streamed over the World Wide Web. It's like such a big technology that they had to educate people. So when I was at Real Networks, I was able to take all the learnings I had on building those networks back at the Nortel days, and we were a content delivery company. So we were creating and delivering content, audio, video, value-added services to end consumers and to enterprises over those networks. So basically built the network and then filled the network. After leaving Real Networks, I moved and made the next move into cybersecurity, and I joined McAfee. So McAfee, one of the world famous cybersecurity companies. And in McAfee, I was involved in taking the next step from building the network and then filling the network to protecting the network from a cybersecurity perspective. And now I'm at Blackberry. And at Blackberry, so I've made the circle back to the Canadian company after some time in a couple American companies. And I'm helping be involved in all of the new initiatives that Blackberry has across IoT, cybersecurity, but very, very special to me and what I run as the sub-business unit within the company, which is critical events management. So from a career standpoint, I've made a kind of a full circle back into the Canadian company.
Well, it's interesting, and sometimes specifically some of a senior role as well, you need to have a broader vision. It starts from maybe the ins and outs of a technology of delivering the next layers, your real networks, building the videos on top. And then even the wrapper, what you're looking at now, security, which is everywhere. It has to look at the application. It has to look at the actual inherent networks components as well. But before I take you again to get your vision on how the world of telecom and mobile is developing, let me talk about geography again, because I do like that. I believe I experience a bit different parts of the world, and I believe it changed your perspective again. At Real Network, you just mentioned, a great brand. If you remember from the 90s, if you're out there and don't, have a look at Real Networks, in one of our members of today as well. But you have a GM for Asia Pacific and Japan, and then for Europe, you became a vice president as well and GM for Europe. I can't imagine the Canadian coming from the US, first to Japan, then to Europe. Let's talk about culture shock a bit. How is the world out there?
It's as I said, I guess I've made my life the scenic journey. Never taking the easy way to anything, but definitely the journey that matters. So I'm Canadian, as I mentioned, and I started my career, and I spent 2 years of my professional career living and working in Canada. And in 1998, I moved to Singapore. I was offered an opportunity to go and look after the finance operations for Nortel for Southeast Asia. So I moved to Singapore, Dario, back in the summer of 1998, it was supposed to be a 1-year assignment. I haven't moved back to Canada since, over 20, almost 25 years. So I go back, of course, and visit, but I haven't actually lived in Canada since then. So I started and I learned the difference between, which is obvious now, but if you're a Canadian growing up, or you're North American or any other country, and you move to a completely different continent, let alone country, let alone language, all of these different cultural things just come and really grow you. I had hundreds of hotel nights in Hong Kong and Beijing in those early years. I went to Australia many times. I went to India. And then in year 2000, I was asked if I would move to Tokyo. So I moved to Tokyo, and in Tokyo, just an incredible journey, incredible country, and incredible learnings. But if there's one word that I can use for Japan, I would say it's quality. And all of us that have been in the mobile ecosystem, you've heard the term carrier grade when it comes to quality. Maybe that might be synonymous with the 5 nines accountability model. Yes, that's for uptime and how long you can be down. But quality in Japan goes much, much, much deeper, almost to the soul of the supplier and the people that are sitting across the table. It just transformed my vision on how you have to approach things. And how if something goes wrong, you have to go 1000%, not just 100%, 1000% to make things better. After Japan in 2007, I moved to Austria with Real Networks, and I moved into the Germanic world, living in Austria and spending a lot of time in Germany, right on the border, and in addition, living in Europe. So I was essentially commuting up to near where you are in London, going to London all the time. Vodafone was a major customer of ours, so I was going up to Dusseldorf a lot, and then visiting many Vodafone and Deutsche Telekom and other customers in the carrier world. And I learned then, which is obvious now, but again, if you're Canadian, then you've lived in Asia for a long time, you don't necessarily recognize Europe is many different countries. Many different countries, and within each country they have their own subcultures, just like America has its own subcultures. There are subcultures in France and subcultures in the UK and other places. The expectations, the language, the business language, the sentiments are different. And then I was asked to move to the United States, and I thought moving to the United States, oh, I moved to Singapore when I was young. I moved to Tokyo, different languages. I moved to Austria, had to deal with, a different language again. It would be easy moving to the Texas area. It's just like Canada. And then I realized it's not. America and Canada are also very different. It's similar. The language is the same, although many people tease me about my Canadian accent here. But it's also very different. And then I had the opportunity to, in 2016, move back to Tokyo after being away for almost a decade. And so I went back to Japan again and was able to experience it all over again and get the relearnings. And I've been back here in Texas for the last 3 years. So, and supporting a Canadian company, flying up to our Waterloo headquarters quite, on a regular basis. So back to where I went to school. So again, the scenic route, Dario.
Well, at least you have now built some backwards links to the original starting point.
Absolutely.
In your path, in your scenic routes, you have touched on some pretty important brands in terms of security. And let me ask you for a small reflection about that path itself. I mean, part of it, you can say you were at Intel. That was when McAfee was introduced as part of a bigger family, and then was spun backwards separately as well. And then you also seen the smaller reality of Lookout, which in the mobile world we know very well as a mobile specific vendor security vendor as well. Now you are on Blackberry, and now you're looking at security. So multiple perspectives. Can I ask you to reflect back on that? Is it what's common in all of these different jobs and companies in terms of security? Are there completely different roles, or is there really one single security? Are there multiple security jobs out there? How do you look at the world in these different companies? Is it common? Do they speak the same language? Well, no, notwithstanding the Japanese versus German.
Of course. I would say maybe just step back just under a decade or so. When I was at Real Networks, before I entered the cybersecurity world in, I think it was 2014, it was towards my end of my tenure at Real Networks, there was a major hack of Sony. I'm sure many people remember this hack. And although I didn't work for Sony, but Real Networks had acquired a small division from Sony, and my office was in a satellite office in a very large factory and facility that Sony owned in Austria. So although our systems were not impacted, many other people that were going to the same cafeteria or other things like that we would see around this large factory were impacted. So I was able to physically see what was happening with this hack. And then very quickly after that, I think just a few months after that, there was another major high-level hack, which was a data breach. So the Sony hack was a ransomware hack, so to speak. So it brought down the company themselves. With Target, the next major hack that people talked about a lot, it was a data breach. And so when those two things happened about 2014, early 2015, I remember that no one understood. So there's been hacking and adversaries in computing since computing existed. going way, way, way back. But this was really the first that really got the global world starting to talk about it. And if you think about how we look at cybersecurity today, just a simple thing such as the Chief Information Security Officer role, every company has a Chief Information Security Officer role now today. No one, or very few people, unless you were deep in the industry, there was no one with a CISO role in 2014. That's evolved since then. And now fast forward to today. So just yesterday, you might have heard, I'm sure many people heard, there was a massive disruption in the air industry in the United States with the air traffic control system dropping down for a period of time. There was a technical issue of some sort. And what was on the headlines, at least here in the United States, where it was impacting, you listen to CNN, you listen to Fox News, and everyone was wondering, was this a cyber incident? Yeah. So, and they weren't explaining what a cyber incident was. It was just at the mass media level, was this a cyber incident? Versus going back to the Target hack back in 2014, it was the media would be explaining what a hack actually is, defining it, explaining down to the detail to the consumer and to the mass audience what it is. So it was educating now to, hey, was this actually happening? So just the awareness today of cyber threats is so much higher than it was in previous times.
Well, and I'm taking the scenic route myself here. I'm following your path. You see, I've asked you to go through it, and I really realized that I haven't asked you to explain what you're doing right now, which is, what is Blackberry and security right now, and specifically, I introduced a critical events management role. What is that?
What is critical events management?
What's your job, by the way, Ken? What are you doing?
Well, maybe I should start off by outlining a little bit of the journey that Blackberry has had.
Sure.
So I'm sure many people know Blackberry. In fact, when I was at your MEF Connects in Las Vegas recently, I think when you were there, and I was doing a speech, I asked the audience to raise their hands if they had ever utilized a Blackberry device, and a huge portion of the audience had used one, and you could basically tell the age of the people of the audience by those raising their hands or not. If they were under, say, 25 or 30, they maybe had never used one versus everyone else had. So BlackBerry, of course, was in the forefront of mobile technology, and many people might not know this, but long before the devices that were being used for email, they were a pager company back in the Research in Motion or RIM days. They then became synonymous with mobile communication. In fact, I'm sure many people sent their first email on the run using a BlackBerry device. I did. I don't know about you, Dario, but many millions and tens of millions of people sent their first mobile emails using a BlackBerry device. The company has obviously evolved significantly since then. And today, the company has two mega business divisions. One is what we call our IoT division, and the primary areas under that are operating systems for various types of IoT devices, one of them being autonomous automobiles. And there was a big showing on that at the CES that just happened last week. And then the other side is our cybersecurity business. And so BlackBerry is a cybersecurity company now. And within the cybersecurity umbrella, there's a sub-business unit, which is critical events management. And I'm the global GM of that business unit. So what is critical events management, as you asked me? So we help organizations, and an organization can be an enterprise, it can be a community, a city, a county, a province, a state. It can be a government agency, an army, a Ministry of Defense, a foreign service office, whatever that might be. We help these organizations reach out using multiple methods of communication to reach out to their stakeholders. Be it, if you're a county, then your citizens. If you're an employer, if you're MEF, it's your employees, right? Yep. In times of when there's a critical event. So what's a critical event? A critical event could be anything that will disrupt the normal course of business or normal course of life for that organization. Major critical events can be driven by Mother Nature. Mother Nature, we're seeing unfortunately in a huge amount really right now, being with the storms that have affected over just the last few days and week in California, and the massive flooding that's happening, the 100-year storm that they're seeing, or the 100-year hurricane that smashed into the west coast of Florida earlier this year, or the heat wave that I'm sure you personally experienced in the UK this past summer. Those types of things. It can be a pandemic, which the whole world went through recently. It is a critical event. Or it can be a cyber event. So going back to some of the examples, the FAA's issue, that is a critical event. The Southwest Airlines meltdown around the holidays, that's a critical event. When you go through those types of events, those organizations need to be able to communicate with their stakeholders in a very fast and efficient method. So that's what we do.
What would you then say right now that then for your unit, critical event management within Blackberry, would be your biggest challenge? What takes most of your time today as a general manager of the unit?
Well, at the highest level, being part of Blackberry, which is a extremely well respected, extremely well known brand, which is just absolutely wonderful for us. But we have to balance the history of that strong brand with the migration from those devices that we had and now moving towards all of these new businesses that we are involved. One thing I can tell you is Blackberry was always known for very high quality, very high security before anybody thought about mobile security. There was Blackberry security. Everyone used it. They were always the President of the United States used it, right? Was famous that President Obama used a Blackberry and insisted that he could use a Blackberry when he came into office. So Blackberry is synonymous with security. So that's carried on into our cybersecurity business. So that's just making sure that people can understand where we are and what our history is. Articulating that is hugely important. Within critical events, it's making sure organizations understand the need for this type of product and service. And I can tell you, Dario, there's never been a more important time. As I mentioned before, the world is just unfortunately a little bit more of a scary place these days. And organizations have a duty of care to their stakeholders, to especially enterprises, to their employees. They need to know how to prepare for these incidents and then how to message out in these times of crisis.
That's, comes to my mind, the term perma-crisis being used as a word of the year. You're now living in a permanent status of crisis.
Exactly.
So your critical communication seems to be much more relevant than they ever were before, all of a sudden. So let me reflect on that as well. What are the market changing things that you are seeing in the security market itself? Over the last decades, what would you say that by now things are dramatically different?
From a product or technology perspective in cybersecurity, many, I mean, the amount of information that is collected by organizations, the data. Everyone talks about big data these days, and data is the new gold or the new oil. Protecting that data is absolutely critical these days. So that's one. Just where the data, you always wanted to protect the data, and the target hack was a data breach. But most of the hacks going further back were more, you were trying to protect your PC. And that was primarily what you needed to look after. Most people didn't understand data protection. So that's one. Previously, going back, it was individuals or humans or small amount of technology that were creating the viruses that were going after things. The threats and the threat landscape has dramatically changed. It's artificial intelligence helps out on many things, but artificial intelligence and machine learning also help the adversaries to create threats. So you need to also have artificial intelligence, which Blackberry has, and we exercise it very strongly to help solve and resolve those issues when you're fighting the adversary. So just some of those items are hugely important when you think about cybersecurity in this day and age.
I like that. I like it as a reflections of now when you mentioned it, it's true. We used to defend things in the past. We now defend possibly data, your passwords, your information, your logs. And for what you're saying, we are starting to go one step beyond. We're now defending processes. How do you manage all of those?
The software supply chain is the next major threat vector.
Yeah.
Which Blackberry just put a post out on in a big study. The solar winds attack. It wasn't an attack directly on solar winds directly. It was through the supply chain. You used to be thinking that you need to go and put something installed on somebody's machine, and then maybe that would infiltrate the corporate network. Now it's you put something on the systems that go and review the system, and that then can be compromised. So just the threat landscapes themselves have dramatically changed.
So if we used to think that it was just a question of getting an antivirus 20 years ago or something like that, your life has changed now. You need to move on and reinvent your protection as a human being or as a business even. Yeah.
Across the board, as a family, and when I was at McAfee, a very large portion of my time was actually spent protecting the consumer. And so we, of course, focused heavily on the PC and then also on the mobile devices. But we very quickly moved to securing the family through the router and through the network as well. How do you protect against the IoT devices that are sitting in your homes? Those sort of things you had to protect.
Our time will come back, but I don't want to take too much of that. Though, one more question as you're here. Almost to finalize, for what you've seen from your experience, now let's use that to look at the future. Nobody's got a crystal ball, but what do you see coming up in the mobile industry? And potentially, what do you think that the mobile industry needs to do to make sure that it does develop as a positive solution to businesses and consumers as it is right now?
Well, I mean, I don't necessarily have my own crystal ball, but CES was literally last week. And although I personally wasn't there, I followed all the blogs and everything along those lines. And the news reports are all coming out that CES was almost an auto show. So because cars right now are really computers on wheels, so that's how things are changing. So CES was very much on autos, and that is very much driven by the computing in the car and then the connectivity. And Mobile World Congress is 5-6 weeks away. So I'm sure there's going to be a huge amount of announcements at Mobile World Congress on cloud computing. I'm sure that there will be, because it's Mobile World Congress, there will be network equipment discussions on how to build out the faster next generation machine learning or AI driven mobile network. I know Rakuten Symphony is doing a lot of things on that and doing lots of announcements. So I'm sure there'll be things on that. I'm sure there'll be a lot of items on the metaverse and a lot of items on augmented reality and AI and machine learning. So all of those things I'm sure will happen, but all of those items come down to the core network, remember, which we don't talk about so much these days. We talk about all the services and everything on top of it, but they don't work if you don't have the core network. Security is going to be even more and more and more important. The growth in the TAM in that business is growing significantly. And I would be remiss to not mention that as all of these things are growing, real world problems still exist. There is still weather, which is happening, whether you have a metaverse, whether you have AI, all of these things, the weather is changing. There is still social unrest. There's a war in Europe. All of these real world physical items are still happening. So you need to take advantage of the technology because the world is becoming a bit more of a scarier place. You need to, your duty of care to your constituents has just increased dramatically. So you need to be able to not only secure your networks with your security and build your products, but you need to secure your workforce and your constituents. And to do that, you need to be able to communicate with them. So that's my view of the future, Dario.
Well, it's an interesting view. And you're right. You're only a few weeks away from MWC, but those things we're already starting to see. You're right. You're already starting to see that it is not just the bells and whistles, very important, of what's on top. its importance of how sophisticated your ability to deliver it securely is actually to make it all
Exactly.
happening over top.
Exactly.
I'm afraid that I'm using all the time that I had, at least for this time, because I'd like to follow up later on, more information. We've touched on all of these, but for now, Ken, it's lovely to see you again at MEF. I hope we're going to explore many more topics, but for the time being, a big welcome, a big thank you to spending the last 20, 30 minutes discussing some of the trends and your experience in the industry as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dario.
Bye-bye.